Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Eves and Ted Trafford, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
Our inaugural guest is Joel White, founder of Marketcap Consulting and a veteran in the clinical research industry. He's got over 17 years of experience. Joel specializes in boosting financial performance and strategic execution for businesses. He has enormous experience in the CRO space. Joel, I'm going to say, is our clinical trial finance guru and CRO whisperer.
I love it. So what we're going to talk about in these next sections is going to be really around the Q2 2024 earnings recap. And we're going to dive deep into this one and going to cover a lot of information and a lot of nuances. So we're looking forward to speaking to Joel about it.
Yeah, let's get it going.
So in terms of, are there particular areas where you're very bullish on, Joel, after looking at not just the Q2 performance, but also the big trends that you've seen over the last 4 quarters, as an example?
Yeah, I'm very bullish on the research side, and I would say bullish from a valuation standpoint, just to put it into raw financials. Unfortunately, none of these companies are, at least that I'm aware of, are publicly traded. So I can't really do a quarterly recap on them. But there's a lot of publicly available, and then just through my work, there's just a tremendous amount of capital, whether it's private equity, whether it's the M&A war chest that several large CROs have. There's a lot of eyeballs, looking at individual research sites and especially networks of sites as acquisition targets. And from what I'm seeing, the more diversified the sites are, the better equipped they are to be on the receiving end of this. And I'm bullish for a few reasons. One of the 2 largest CROs in the world, ICON, has said that as of today, they run about 10% of their clinical trial activity through their own wholly owned sites, which itself is a huge number.
Wow.
And the CEO is publicly committed to growing that to 30% in the coming years, it's still, even though I've talked about it a few times, it still just blows my mind.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to wrap my mind around it. And I put in the last quarter recap that I don't actually believe it's doable for the entire CRO's portfolio. I could see it for certain therapeutic
sectors.
areas. Yeah, like infectious disease.
Yeah.
Maybe even CNS. But you get beyond that 30%. Ted, you're on the side side. That's hard to believe. Yeah.
It is. And a public statement like that makes me wonder about lots of different things. But one of the things, honestly, should non-ICON sites be concerned about this when they're doing business with ICON? You go through all this work to fill out feasibility questionnaires and pre-study visits, and are you legitimately being considered for the trial?
Yeah, I think as of today, it's not an issue. But if they actually achieve this 30% goal, and if they achieve it broadly across numerous therapeutic areas, or let alone their entire study portfolio, then, well, I don't know if I'd be concerned, Ted. I'd probably be putting a for sale sign out, and saying, wow, okay.
Right.
I mean, that would really create a supply and demand issue for, just in terms of pure supply and demand for sites being acquired. Icon's not the only one in the market.
Right.
IQVIA hasn't been as bold about their go forward plans for acquiring sites, but they have acquired significant networks over the past, I think, really year and a half. And if other CROs join this, in addition to all the private equity and other private funding that's trying to acquire these sites and sites that are merging together and things like that, there's only so many sites out there, and there's only so many new sites being created each year.
Right.
But you've got all this money, going after it. That can really squeeze up, valuation multiples. So from a site owner standpoint,
could be
if CROs and private money really get super serious about owning a significant percentage of sites, there may be other issues that creates, but one of
Yeah.
those issues won't be valuation for sites.
Right. Do you think there's any issue where, given the relationship, the current relationships between sponsors and CROs and sites, do you think sponsors should be concerned about a statement like that? Like, are they really getting proposed the best sites for a study?
Uh, I don't do any consulting on the procurement or outsourcing side of the market. So there's only so much I can speak to the mindset
Right.
of the pharma side. But one of the things that drives, especially on the biotech side, getting to the small, medium biotech side, one of the most difficult parts of life for those companies is to run a trial. How many different companies you have to contract with to get a trial achieved? And it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to put all your eggs in one basket, or be able to use one company to run the entire trial. But it's getting more and more to the point with some of the larger CROs where a huge percentage of the trial can be run through the CRO, including its own sites. And so it helps doesn't eliminate, but it helps reduce the overall complexity of starting up a trial and running a trial from the sponsor's standpoint. There are all kinds of nuances and trade-offs involved in that. But yeah, it's a pretty terrific sales pitch if you can go to a sponsor and say, we will be your CRO, we will be your central lab, we will be your patient recruitment provider, and we'll be your sites. Right? People say, oh my gosh, we can't do that with 10 sites. Well, there's a lot of precedent for this. You look at the early phase one clinic
Right.
space.
Yep.
CROs have owned phase one clinics forever.
Yep.
To some extent, I know that's a special case, but it's not like CROs have never owned sites before, and they're quieter about it. But PPD has had the ownership structure is a little bit different, but PPD has had a vast site network for many years, and I believe it's more heavily weighted towards vaccines and such. And yeah, long story short, I once interviewed at a company that was a CRO that owned a site down the street, and the different operations were just Ted operated on different floors of the same high rise,
Right.
and the firewall was basically your access card between the floors. Right? I mean,
And go up and down the stairs.
yeah, I saw it in person. Like, I got the walk around. It was fascinating. And Sarah Cannon Research Institute is the one. You can see it on their website.
Yeah.
So there's all different flavors of this. But I personally, and I don't pretend to have anywhere near the final answer on this. I don't have ethical concerns about it, and I think that there's only so far that opportunity extends. You're not going to have CROs owning 100% of sites or
It'd be
anything
hard.
like that.
Yeah.
What I need, Ted, is I need some of these larger site networks to go public, so that way, selfishly, I can start tracking and reporting on them.
Right.
That's great.
What's your take on it, Ted? Living in the site side.
What my take on it is that, like, it's such it's evolving so quickly. And when we started 29 years ago, there's very few networks or SMOs or anything like that. And most of them that were around then are not around anymore. But in the last 10, 15 years, it has gotten so difficult for new physicians to get into clinical trials and get involved in clinical trials and get started in clinical trials that these networks give an opportunity for that entry, that to accelerate that entry by years because of their, connections and ability to secure studies. So, like, I do believe the networks, the groups of sites are going to continue to grow dramatically, because we've just created an environment where it's almost impossible for a new physician to get involved in clinical trials and do everything on their own. It just sets them back years.
Yeah. So Liam, before you pivot, I'd say the number one reason I'm bullish on sites and why I think there's so much money flowing to the space is that what is the number one source of ROI in the industry to improve clinical trials? It's not any piece of technology I'm aware of. It's high performing sites. It has been for a long time, and now more than ever. Yep.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's one thing I always say is that the two first principles of a clinical trial are people, and that's patients and individuals, to access data essentially from patients, and the technology, and whether that's a drug or a blood pressure monitor or an MRI, to access the data from these individuals. So I'm right there with you. I really couldn't agree anymore.
Yep.
In terms of, you mentioned previously on another episode around the overall state of the pharma market and spending and so on and so forth. Am I right in thinking that, or seeing that, the preclinical spending is shrinking?
Yeah, and that's for something I don't have macro numbers on, but and it wasn't the quarterly recap as the first post. I posted a chart of 4 preclinical companies I follow, and they all look like huge mountains, not bell curves, huge mountains, where 2020, 2021, they spiked during COVID, and they're all in the dumps.
Interesting.
So, this is like a note of Charles River, Certara, some of these companies that really focus very heavily on the preclinical and super human early clinical space as well. And you listen to their calls, and it's not just that they had terrible quarters, but they've been having terrible quarters, and they're saying that the next few quarters are going to be terrible. What's interesting though is I thought, okay, well, maybe this is the start of a trend, and it could be, of companies being extremely more efficient on preclinical research, and that could very well be the case. And these companies I mentioned, they would not be the first to say that, right? They don't have an incentive to say that, right? What they all, almost in identical terminology, pointed to was the Inflation Reduction Act and some kind of like legislative, statutory reasons that are having sponsors reprioritize or re-rationalize their preclinical portfolio and dedicate more of their spend towards the later phase segment of their portfolio. Because you look at the CROs and the later phase providers, they're not saying the same thing. They're like, we know what the IRA is, but we're not seeing an impact. Sponsors may be shuffling between later phase compounds, but in terms of their overall pipelines, they're not really seeing an impact on the later phase side. But the preclinical companies are absolutely getting smashed. I struggle to get well read up on the whole NHP, non-human primate issue that popped up a year or two ago. Some of them pointed to that as an ongoing drag, but yeah, Charles River put it very plainly, and they're kind of the big dog in the space. They said, demand is drying up. It's creating serious pricing competition issues, and we expect that to go on for several quarters. And wow. Yeah.
As you're talking about that, the thing that pops into my head that really causes great concern is that, are we going to start to lose innovation in the rare disease space? Because if companies are prioritizing these late stage compounds and we're seeing less going into phase 1, how many of the ones getting sacrificed are those for rare disease?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, that's where you could have a million guests who would be a lot more expert at that than I would be. But if companies are getting tremendously more efficient at preclinical discovery,
right?
There's also, again, something that I need to get better read up on, this field where people and organizations are finding ways to repurpose older compounds and products for rare diseases. Anything beyond that, it's over my head, so I'm not going to say anything more about it. But in the rare disease space, if there is a dramatic improvement in preclinical efficiency, and if there's really, which there appears to be really something to the efficacy of repurposing older compounds, then maybe there'll be something there. The market size is there, certainly, and the economics are there for rare disease. So a number of companies like BioMarin and such have proven it out. So I think it's there. We'll see.
I think it's a really interesting point in which that if these efficiencies, we can, let's say, for instance, become twice as efficient, but we're reducing preclinical work by 75%, we may actually find an increase in the number of drugs that are coming through to phase 1, right? That would be a really interesting explore, actually, to look at, just to try and understand that pipeline.
Yeah, I think it's a real AI opportunity. One of the few. There's areas of AI where I'm extremely optimistic, and then there's some like Microsoft Excel where I'm not. But it's because I live in Excel for a large part of the day. But when it comes to drug discovery and the ability not just to find new compounds, but minimize how many patients or subjects need to be recruited at the preclinical stage and things like that, the modeling, the simulations, things like that does seem to be ripe for AI innovation.
There's definitely disruption there. I think that some of there's some complexities, I think, and I won't even pretend to know. I know that any depth of this, but looking at, for instance, some of the data and some of the papers that are published, and a lot of them are hard to reproduce. And I do, just like my level of understanding from technology is bad data in, bad data out. So I just wonder how much of that will actually play a part. But I on a macro, I completely agree with you, Joel.